Our 29th anniversary party should have been a happy milestone, but it ended with my world crashing down. I stood frozen, listening to my wife tell my best friend that our 4 kids belonged to him. That betrayal broke me, so I took my money and disappeared without a word. For 5 years I lived a quiet, lonely life, convinced I knew the ugly truth. That changed yesterday when a doctor called to discuss my old medical records. He dropped a bombshell about my body that completely shattered my reality, proving I had made a terrible mistake. The party noise hummed in the backyard, but the kitchen was quiet enough for secrets. I stood just out of sight behind the swinging door, holding an empty ice bucket. Sarah was leaning in close to Mark near the refrigerator, her hand on his arm. The tone of her voice was hushed and frantic, unlike anything I had heard before. I froze in place, instinctively knowing I was about to hear something meant to remain hidden forever. Her words cut through the air with terrifying clarity. Sarah looked Mark dead in the eye and told him that he was the real father of all 4 children. She insisted that I had been sterile for decades and that the doctors had confirmed it long ago. Mark looked like he had been punched in the gut, staggering back against the counter. I felt the floor drop out from under me as my entire life turned into a lie. Instead of bursting into the room to confront them, I turned and walked silently toward the stairs. My hands shook as I pulled a large suitcase from the top shelf of the closet. I threw in clothes, important documents, and a few small personal items without folding anything. The laughter from the party outside drifted through the window, mocking the destruction happening inside. I needed to leave before anyone saw the devastation written on my face. I sat at the desk in the corner of the bedroom and opened my laptop. With trembling fingers, I logged into our banking portal and navigated to the joint savings section. I initiated a transfer for the entire balance, moving every cent to an offshore account I had set up for emergencies years ago. Sarah would find out soon enough that her safety net was gone. It was a petty act, but it felt like the only justice available. The engine of my truck roared to life, drowning out the faint sound of music coming from the backyard. I backed out of the driveway quickly, ignoring the festive balloons tied to the mailbox. The house grew smaller in the rearview mirror until I turned onto the main highway and it disappeared completely. I kept my eyes fixed on the road ahead, refusing to look back at the life I was leaving behind. There was nothing left for me there. 3 days later, I found a rundown cabin nestled near the base of the mountains. It was isolated and quiet, exactly what I needed to process the shock. To keep my mind busy, I took a job at a local lumber yard hauling heavy timber. The physical exhaustion helped me sleep at night without dreaming about the betrayal. My hands grew calloused and rough, transforming me into a man who bore little resemblance to the husband I used to be. Disappearing required cutting every digital tie that bound me to my past life. I bought a burner phone with a new number and smashed my old SIM card with a hammer. When I checked my email at the library, I saw hundreds of messages from Sarah and the kids. I deleted the entire account without opening a single one. Reading their confusion or excuses would only weaken my resolve to stay away. I had to remain a ghost to survive. Evenings in the mountains were long and silent, so I filled them with hard work. The cabin roof leaked during storms, so I spent hours up there patching shingles. When the weather was dry, I chopped enough firewood to last through the harsh winter months. The rhythmic sound of the axe hitting the wood became my only company. It was a simple, solitary existence that kept the painful memories at bay. I built a fortress of solitude, one log at a time. Sarah apparently tried to reach me through the postal service for months. The postmaster at my old town likely had a stack of envelopes waiting for a forwarding address that would never come. I had made sure that no paper trail led to my cabin in the woods. Her desperate scribbles and pleas remained unread, gathering dust in a dead letter bin somewhere. Silence was the only response she deserved after what she did. I refused to let her voice reach me again. My trips into town were rare and strictly for necessities like food and hardware. I kept my head down in the grocery aisles, avoiding eye contact with the friendly locals. People eventually stopped trying to make small talk with the quiet stranger from the mountain. I bought canned goods, coffee, and basic tools, then loaded the truck and left immediately. The less anyone knew about me, the safer my secret life remained. Anonymity was my most valuable possession. 5 years had passed when I found myself kneeling on the front porch with a hammer in hand. The sun was beating down on my neck as I replaced a rotted floorboard. Suddenly, the vibration of my phone in my pocket startled me, breaking the mountain silence. I pulled it out and stared at the screen, frowning at an area code I did not recognize. Nobody had this number except for the clinic I visited for a flu shot last week. I hesitated for a long moment before sliding my thumb across the screen to answer. A calm, professional voice on the other end introduced himself as Dr. Evans. He apologized for the intrusion, but insisted that the matter was urgent. My grip tightened on the phone as I wondered what could possibly be so important. I leaned against the railing, wiping sweat from my forehead with my sleeve. It seemed my quiet isolation was about to be interrupted. Before he would speak further, the doctor required me to confirm my full name and date of birth. He sounded serious, like someone delivering news that required strict protocol. I gave him the information, my voice raspy from disuse. He typed something into a computer on his end, the clicking keys audible through the speaker. Once he was satisfied that I was the right person, his tone shifted. He said they had been reviewing old records transferred from my previous city. Dr. Evans explained that a massive audit of medical files from 20 years ago had just concluded. He told me that my records were flagged due to a significant clerical mix-up at the lab. My heart began to pound against my ribs as I listened to him speak. He said that the fertility tests I took decades ago had been labeled incorrectly. The results I had based my entire life on were flawed from the start. The doctor cleared his throat and delivered the news that stopped my breath. He told me clearly that the sterility diagnosis I received years ago belonged to another man. My test results had actually shown perfectly normal fertility levels all those years ago. The room spun as the implication of his words sank in. I had spent 5 years believing I was incapable of fathering children. Every assumption I had made about my marriage was built on a medical lie. The phone slipped from my hand and clattered onto the wooden porch floor. I didn't even say goodbye before I turned and stormed into the cabin. I grabbed the same duffel bags I had arrived with and started throwing my clothes inside. There was no time to organize anything. I just needed to get back. Rage and confusion boiled inside me, fueling my movements. I had to confront the past that I had run away from so cowardly. The drive back took hours, but I didn't stop for rest or food. I navigated the dark highways with a singular focus, fueled by adrenaline and caffeine. As the sun began to rise, I finally pulled into the familiar driveway I hadn't seen in 5 years. The house looked exactly the same, which made my stomach churn. I killed the engine and stared at the front door. It was time to find out what had really happened that night. I pounded on the door, not caring if I woke up the neighbors. A moment later, the lock clicked and Sarah appeared in the frame, looking older and tired. Her eyes went wide with shock when she saw me standing there, disheveled and angry. She didn't say a word, she just stepped back to let me in. I walked into the hallway, the smell of her perfume bringing back a flood of painful memories. The silence between us was heavy. I didn't look at her as I marched straight into the living room. I slammed a printed copy of the email Dr. Evans had sent me onto the coffee table. Sarah flinched at the noise but followed me into the room. I pointed a shaking finger at the paper, demanding she read it. She picked it up slowly, her hands trembling as her eyes scanned the medical report. I watched her face, waiting for the facade to crack. When she looked up, her face was pale, but I didn't offer any mercy. I asked her bluntly why she had told Mark the children were his at the party. I needed to know why she had destroyed our family with that specific lie. My voice echoed off the walls of the empty house. I told her I knew about the conversation in the kitchen. She had to explain herself right now, or I would burn everything down. Sarah collapsed onto the sofa, burying her face in her hands. She finally broke down and admitted that she had been in severe gambling debt 5 years ago. She had been desperate for cash and knew Mark had always been successful and generous. She told me she concocted the story to manipulate him into giving her money. It was a cold calculation to save herself from loan sharks. She claimed she never meant for me to hear it. Then came the twist that made my blood run cold. She looked up with tear-filled eyes and confessed she knew I wasn't sterile the whole time. Apparently, she had seen a different doctor years ago who confirmed my fertility, but she kept it hidden. She used the old, erroneous diagnosis as leverage to fool Mark. She knew the kids were mine, but she sold their paternity to my best friend for cash. She had played both of us. The extent of her scheme was sickening. She explained that Mark had been paying her thousands of dollars every month in secret child support. He believed he was taking responsibility for his biological children, just as a good man would. He had kept the secret to protect my feelings, all while Sarah drained his bank account. My best friend hadn't betrayed me, he was being extorted. My wife had turned our children into bargaining chips. I turned away from her sobbing figure and looked at the gallery wall. Photos of my 4 children stared back at me, frozen in time from 5 years ago. I realized with horror that I had walked away from my own flesh and blood based on a misunderstanding. I had missed graduations, birthdays, and heartbreaks because I was too proud to ask questions. I had abandoned them when they needed a father, leaving them with a liar. There was nothing left to say to Sarah, so I turned my back on her. I walked out to the front porch, the morning air filling my lungs. Pulling my phone from my pocket, I dialed the number of my eldest son. It rang 3 times before a hesitant voice answered. I took a deep breath, ready to start the long road of earning their forgiveness. It was time to come home for real.